The billionaire freezes mid-sip of his whiskey as the television commercial zooms in on the magazine cover, revealing the sapphire blue eyes of the three children smiling back at him, the same unique color that has only existed in his family for generations. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Zoe Johnson stepped out of the doctor's office on Manhattan's Upper East Side, clutching the small black-and-white image to her chest. The late September sun cast long shadows between the towering buildings, but Zoe felt nothing but warmth spreading through her body. 8 weeks. She was 8 weeks pregnant. "Everything looks perfect, Ms. Johnson," the doctor had said, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Strong heartbeat." Now, standing on the busy sidewalk, Zoe allowed herself a moment of pure, unfiltered joy. At 26, she hadn't planned this, hadn't even discussed children with Alexander, but holding the ultrasound image, she couldn't imagine any other reaction than elation. She pulled out her phone, her finger hovering over Alexander's name. This news deserved more than a text or call. This deserved a proper moment. As she navigated the subway back to Queens, Zoe's mind drifted to the night she'd met Alexander Sterling III, heir to the Sterling Properties empire. She had been working the buffet at a Columbia University fundraiser, a catering gig to supplement her graphic design internship income. Alexander had approached the table, tall and commanding in his perfectly tailored suit. "The presentation of these hors d'oeuvres is exquisite," he'd said, surprising her with commentary about design principles rather than the typical entitled demands she was used to from wealthy patrons. "I'm a designer, not a caterer," she'd replied boldly. "This is just to pay the bills until someone recognizes my actual talent." His laugh had been genuine, his interest immediate. By the end of the night, he'd slipped her his private number, not his business card, which felt significant somehow. 1 year later, their relationship remained what Alexander called blissfully private. Zoe understood the complications. He was the scion of old Boston money, the CEO of a billion-dollar real estate empire, a fixture in social circles that would view a relationship with the daughter of Jamaican immigrants as beneath him. "Our relationship is too special to be exposed to the vultures of society," he would say, kissing her forehead whenever she hinted at meeting his family or friends. Today, none of that mattered. Today, they were creating a family of their own. Reaching her small apartment in Queens, Zoe immediately began preparing a special dinner. She picked up Alexander's favorite wine, which she would no longer be drinking, and spent nearly 3 hours cooking jerk chicken with the recipe her mother had brought from Jamaica, alongside roasted vegetables and fresh bread. The table was set perfectly by 7 o'clock, the time Alexander had promised to arrive. Candles waited to be lit, wine to be poured. The ultrasound image was tucked inside an envelope beside his plate. By 8, Zoe had texted him twice. By 9, she had called 3 times, reaching only voicemail. At 9:30, she reheated the food for the second time. The candles remained unlit. When her phone finally rang at 9:45, she lunged for it. "I'm on my way," Alexander said, his words slightly slurred. "Got caught with the investors. You know how it is, darling." Relief washed over her. "No problem. Dinner's waiting." By the time Alexander's key turned in the lock, it was almost 11. Zoe had changed 3 times, settling on a simple blue dress that brought out the warm undertones in her brown skin. She'd spent the wait time practicing how she would tell him, imagining his face lighting up with joy. The reality that stumbled through her door was nothing like her imagination. Alexander's tie hung loose around his neck, his normally perfectly combed hair disheveled. He smelled of expensive whiskey and something else, a floral perfume that Zoe immediately recognized was not hers. "Sorry I'm late, babe," he said, kissing her cheek instead of her lips. "The Phillips deal is finally going through. We had to celebrate." Zoe swallowed her questions about the perfume. Not tonight. Tonight was about their future. "I made your favorite," she said, guiding him to the table. "I have news, Alex. Something wonderful." His eyes darted around the room, taking in the elaborate dinner setup, the candles, the envelope. A flicker of something, panic, crossed his face before he masked it with a smile. "Let me just freshen up first," he said, disappearing into the bathroom. Zoe relit the candles, poured him wine, and took a deep breath. This wasn't going as planned, but it would still be perfect. It had to be. When Alexander returned, he seemed more composed but distant, checking his phone repeatedly as they began to eat. "Alex," Zoe finally said, unable to wait any longer. She slid the envelope across the table. "I have something to tell you." He stared at the envelope without touching it. "What's this?" "Open it." His fingers moved slowly, reluctantly. When he pulled out the ultrasound image, his face didn't register confusion, only a cold, calculating look that Zoe had never seen directed at her before. "I'm pregnant," she said, filling the silence. 8 weeks. We're having a baby." The transformation that came over Alexander's face was like watching a mask slip into place. The slight softness around his eyes hardened. His mouth, usually quick to smile in her presence, thinned to a tight line. "You're pregnant," he repeated, his voice flat. "Yes." "Isn't it amazing? I know we hadn't planned it, but you really think I would ruin my future because of an unplanned pregnancy with someone like you?" The words hit her like physical blows. "Someone like you." Zoe felt her breath leave her body. What do you mean?" she managed. Alexander leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking very sober. "Zoe, my family lineage goes back 6 generations. The board expects me to marry Rebecca Hamilton next summer. It's practically been arranged since we were children." "Rebecca," Zoe whispered, "you're engaged?" "Not officially, not yet." He sighed, as if explaining something tedious to a child. "Look, you're a smart woman. You must have known this was never going to be permanent." Zoe felt the room spinning around her. "But you said you loved me. Last week you said—" "I said what men say when they're enjoying themselves." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the table. $10,000. Take care of it and don't contact me again." The envelope landed beside her plate, obscenely white against the dark tablecloth. "Take care of it?" Zoe repeated numbly. "Don't make this difficult." Alexander stood, straightening his tie. "You've always been a convenient pastime, Zoe. Fun, exotic, but not sterling material. Surely you knew that." Exotic. The word sliced through her like a razor. She'd heard it before, from men who saw her brown skin as a novelty, not her intelligence or talent or heart. "Get out," she whispered, her voice trembling. Alexander didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He simply turned and walked to the door, never looking back, closing it softly behind him as if even in this moment of cruelty he couldn't bear to make a scene. Zoe sat frozen at the table, staring at the envelope of money, the price Alexander Sterling had placed on their child's life, on her dignity. The candles burned lower, wax dripping onto the tablecloth she'd saved 3 paychecks to afford. She wasn't sure how long she sat there before the first cramp seized her abdomen. Sharp, vicious, it doubled her over. When she straightened, she felt the warm trickle between her thighs. Looking down, she saw the bloom of red spreading across her blue dress. "No," she gasped, fumbling for her phone. "No, no, no." Her fingers shook as she dialed Alexander's number. Voicemail. Again, again. The next cramp brought her to her knees on the kitchen floor. The blood was coming faster now. "Alexander, please," she sobbed into the phone after the 5th call. "Something's wrong with the baby. I'm bleeding. Please call me back." She managed to dial 911 before another wave of pain crashed over her, this one stealing her consciousness for precious seconds. The dispatcher's voice sounded distant, underwater. When the paramedics arrived, they found Zoe Johnson curled in a fetal position on her kitchen floor, clutching an ultrasound image in one hand and her phone in the other. the screen showing 17 unanswered calls to the same number. In the ambulance, drifting in and out of awareness, Zoe felt her phone vibrate. With tremendous effort, she answered. "Alexander?" "Stop calling me." His voice was glacial. "Don't make a drama out of this, Zoe. You never had what it takes to survive in my world. Women like you are disposable in Manhattan." The phone slipped from her fingers as darkness claimed her. As the paramedics raced to save her threatened pregnancy, Zoe couldn't possibly imagine that 12 years later she would command a billion-dollar empire from the 47th floor of a gleaming skyscraper that would completely overshadow Sterling's declining business. The fluorescent lights of Mount Sinai Hospital buzzed overhead as Zoe regained consciousness. White ceiling, antiseptic smell, beeping monitors. For one blissful moment she couldn't remember why she was there. Then the cramping pain in her abdomen brought everything rushing back. The dinner, Alexander's cruel words, the blood on her blue dress. "Ms. Johnson, you're awake." A nurse appeared at her bedside, checking the IV line running into Zoe's arm. "How are you feeling?" "The baby," Zoe whispered, her throat raw. "Is my baby?" The nurse's expression softened. "The doctor will be in shortly to discuss your condition. You've had a threatened miscarriage, but we're doing everything we can." Zoe's hand instinctively moved to her stomach. Still pregnant. Still a chance. She reached for her phone on the bedside table, wincing at the movement. 17 missed calls to Alexander. No calls from him. With trembling fingers, she tried once more. 1 ring, 2, 3. "Alexander, please," she whispered when his voicemail picked up again. "I'm in the hospital. Mount Sinai. Something's wrong with the baby. I need you." An hour passed, then another. Doctors came and went, explaining about hormone levels and bed rest and warning signs. Zoe nodded mechanically, absorbing nothing but the critical information. The pregnancy was still viable but precarious. By evening, her phone remained silent. She tried again. "It's Zoe. Please call me back. I'm scared." On the third day, when the morning sunlight slanted through the hospital blinds, her phone finally rang. Alexander's name flashed on the screen. "Alexander," she answered, relief flooding her voice. "Thank God. I've been so worried. This has to stop, Zoe." His voice was cold, controlled. The constant calls, the messages, it's becoming harassment. Zoe felt as if she'd been slapped. "I'm in the hospital. I almost lost our baby." "Not my problem. I made my position clear." "How can you say that? I need you here. The doctors want to talk about—" "I gave you money to handle this. Use it for your medical bills and stop calling me." Tears streamed down Zoe's face. "I don't want your money. I want you to care about what's happening to me, to our child." A heavy sigh came through the phone. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You never had what it takes to survive in my world. Women like you are disposable in Manhattan." The same words from the ambulance. This time Zoe felt something crack inside her, not her heart breaking further, but something hardening, crystallizing. "I'll show you disposable," she whispered, but Alexander had already hung up. On the 5th day, the doctors finally discharged her with strict instructions. Bed rest, prenatal vitamins, weekly checkups, no stress. Zoe almost laughed at the last directive. Outside the hospital, reality waited like a predator. She had missed 5 days of work at the design agency. 3 urgent voicemails from her supervisor became progressively less sympathetic. The final one, left yesterday, informed her that her position had been filled due to unexcused absences. The taxi ride to Queens drained her emergency fund. Climbing the 4 flights to her apartment left her breathless and cramping again. When she reached her door, an eviction notice greeted her. Rent due, 3 days overdue. Inside, the remnants of the dinner with Alexander still sat on the table. Food rotted, candles burned down to stubs. The ultrasound image lay on the floor where the paramedics had left it. The envelope with the money remained untouched on the table. $10,000. In Alexander's world, a trivial sum. In Zoe's, nearly a year's rent, but blood money, payment to erase his child's existence. She slumped onto the couch, exhaustion overwhelming her. Her phone buzzed with a text notification. Hope flared briefly, extinguished when she saw it wasn't Alexander but a reminder of her student loan payment due next week. When she tried calling Alexander again, an automated message informed her that the number she was trying to reach had blocked her calls. The realization settled on her like a physical weight. She was truly alone. The next morning, ignoring doctor's orders, Zoe began the desperate search for work. Her savings would cover only 2 weeks of rent and basic necessities. The hospital bills already totaled more than she had ever owed in her life. By the end of the week, she had secured a position as a receptionist at a small marketing firm, less money than her design job, with no creative outlet. But they needed someone immediately. Nights and weekends, she hunted for freelance design work, building a portfolio website between bouts of morning sickness and crushing fatigue. "Just temporary," she whispered to her growing belly each night. "Just until we're stable again." 2 months passed in a blur of exhaustion. The receptionist job barely covered rent and food. Freelance design jobs were sporadic and underpaid. When a position opened for weekend waitressing at a cafe near Central Park, Zoe took it despite the swelling in her feet and the ache in her lower back. "You're pregnant," the cafe manager observed during her interview, eyeing her small but visible bump. "4 months," Zoe admitted, "but I'm strong, and I need the work." He hired her with obvious reluctance. "First complaint about slow service, you're out." So Zoe learned to smile through nausea, to lift heavy trays while her back screamed in protest, to ignore the pitying looks from mothers who brunched with their designer-clad children. At her 6-month checkup, Zoe sat alone in the examination room, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about how different this should have been. Alexander holding her hand, both of them giddy with excitement. The technician moved the ultrasound wand over her now prominent belly, frowning slightly. "Is something wrong?" Zoe asked, panic rising in her throat. "Not wrong, exactly." The technician adjusted the screen. "The doctor will want to discuss this with you." 20 minutes later, Zoe sat across from Dr. Chen, trying to process what she was hearing. "Triplets?" she repeated, certain she had misunderstood. Dr. Chen nodded, pointing to the ultrasound images. 3 distinct heartbeats. I'm surprised we didn't catch this earlier, but one was hiding behind the others. They're positioned in a way that made detection difficult. 3 babies, Zoe whispered. The news that should have brought triple joy instead multiplied her despair by 3. 3 times the responsibility, 3 times the expense, 3 times the exhaustion. This significantly changes your pregnancy, Dr. Chen continued. Multiple pregnancies carry higher risks. You'll need to reduce your activity level immediately. No more waitressing, no standing for long periods. Zoe nodded numbly, not bothering to explain that without waitressing, she wouldn't make rent next month. That weekend, moving slower than ever, Zoe worked her cafe shift, forcing smiles as she served wealthy families enjoying their leisure. By the afternoon, her ankles had swollen to twice their normal size, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "You look like you're about to collapse," said a male voice as she set down a plate of avocado toast. Zoe blinked, focusing on the man, mid-40s, kind eyes, business casual attire. "I'm fine, sir. Can I get you anything else?" He frowned. "You should be sitting down. How far along are you?" 6 months. She didn't mention the triplets. "And I'm really fine." When she returned with his check, he was examining a napkin where she had absently sketched a logo while waiting for his credit card. "Did you draw this?" he asked, holding up the napkin. Zoe flushed with embarrassment. "Sorry, just a habit." "It's excellent work. Are you a designer?" "I was. Currently between creative positions." He extended his hand. "Edwin Thompson, CEO of Thompson Energy Solutions. We're rebranding next quarter and our design team is..." Uninspiring. Do you have a portfolio? 2 weeks later, Zoe sat in the lobby of Thompson Energy Solutions in Chicago, clutching her portfolio and trying to calm her racing heart. The job offer, junior designer with a salary that exceeded her combined 3 current jobs, seemed too good to be true. "Ms. Johnson?" The receptionist smiled. "Mr. Thompson will see you now." In his corner office, Edwin Thompson reviewed her portfolio a second time. "I'm offering you this position because I see extraordinary talent here," he said finally. "But I have to ask, why would someone with your abilities be serving coffee?" Zoe hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Life took an unexpected turn. I'm expecting triplets, Mr. Thompson. Most companies aren't eager to hire a single mother about to have 3 newborns." Instead of the withdrawal she expected, Edwin smiled. "My mother raised 4 of us alone after my father died. Toughest, most capable person I've ever known." He extended his hand. "I see something extraordinary in you, Zoe. Rare talents shouldn't be wasted serving coffee." On Christmas Eve, Zoe stood by the window of her tiny new Chicago apartment, watching snow fall on an unfamiliar city. Her hand caressed her prominent belly, feeling the movements of the 3 lives within. "I promise you," she whispered to her unborn children, "one day we'll make Alexander Sterling swallow every cruel word. Not for revenge, but because he needs to know he vastly underestimated the woman he abandoned. We'll build an empire greater than his, and when we meet again, he'll see everything he threw away." While she watched the Christmas Eve snow blanket her new city, Zoe couldn't imagine that one day her name would be associated with the century's greatest revolution in sustainable technology, while the Sterling Empire began its slow but inevitable decline. The snow outside Zoe's Chicago window continued to fall as Christmas Eve deepened into night. In this unfamiliar city, far from the wreckage of her life in New York, she allowed herself a moment of quiet determination. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, her first holiday completely alone, with no family, no friends, and 3 lives depending solely on her. Sleep proved elusive that night. At 3 in the morning, Zoe sat at her small kitchen table, laptop open, working on preliminary designs for Thompson Energy Solutions. The apartment was nearly empty, just a second-hand mattress on the floor, a folding table, and 2 chairs she'd found at a thrift store. Moving to Chicago had consumed most of the money she'd reluctantly accepted from Alexander. Her hand moved automatically to her swollen belly as one of the babies kicked forcefully against her ribs. "Easy there," she whispered. "Mommy's trying to work." The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, nearly 7 months pregnant with triplets, working through the night on Christmas. Yet this tenuous new beginning felt infinitely more hopeful than the life she'd left behind. When morning came, Zoe sent her completed designs to Edwin with a brief holiday greeting, not expecting a response until after the new year. To her surprise, her phone rang 30 minutes later. "These are extraordinary, Zoe," Edwin said without preamble. "Did you work through the night?" "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "On Christmas Eve? Alone in a new city?" Zoe didn't answer, the silence confirming his suspicion. "Where's your family?" he asked gently. "My parents passed away 3 years ago. Car accident." She swallowed hard. "I'm on my own." "And the father of your babies?" She hesitated. "Not in the picture." There was a pause before Edwin spoke again. "My wife is making Christmas dinner. I'm sending a car for you at 4. No arguments." That Christmas became the first of many Zoe would spend with Edwin Thompson and his family. His wife, Eleanor, a pediatrician, took an immediate liking to Zoe, offering practical advice about preparing for triplets. Their teenage children included her in family games with an ease that brought tears to Zoe's eyes. For the first time since Alexander's rejection, she felt human again. Not a failure, not disposable, but valued. The weeks that followed brought increasing physical challenges. By the end of her 7th month, Zoe's petite frame struggled to accommodate 3 growing babies. Working remotely became necessary as her doctor ordered limited movement. Edwin arranged for company equipment to be delivered to her apartment, insisting she maintain full salary despite reduced hours. "Your mind is what we hired," he said firmly when she protested. "And right now, your body needs to focus on those babies." At 32 weeks, during a routine video conference with Edwin and the marketing team, Zoe felt the first contraction. She managed to maintain her composure through the meeting, but as soon as the call ended, another pain gripped her, sharper, more insistent. She dialed Edwin's direct line with shaking fingers. "I think I'm in labor," she said when he answered. "It's too early." What followed was a blur of ambulances, hospital corridors, and medical terminology. Premature labor with triplets. High risk, the doctors said. They would try to delay delivery as long as possible, but preparation for a C-section was already underway. Alone in the labor room, monitors beeping around her, Zoe felt terror unlike anything she'd known. She had no one to call, no hand to hold. When the nurse asked about contacting the father, Zoe shook her head wordlessly. Then, inexplicably, Edwin Thompson walked through the door. "I was in a board meeting when they called," he explained, taking the chair beside her bed. "Eleanor's on her way." Zoe stared at him in disbelief. "You didn't have to come." "No one should face this alone," he said simply. The labor progressed despite medication to stop it. For 19 hours, Edwin remained, alternating with Eleanor, never leaving Zoe without support. When doctors finally determined a C-section was necessary, Edwin squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you know," he told her. "You've got this." In the operating room, under harsh lights and surrounded by medical staff, Zoe felt oddly calm. These babies, her babies, were coming into the world today, ready or not, and they would have a mother who would move mountains for them. "First baby," announced the surgeon. "It's a girl." A tiny, indignant cry filled the room. Tears streamed down Zoe's face. "Second baby," another girl. A softer cry joined the first. And baby number 3, a boy. 3 babies, 3 perfect, tiny humans, born at 4 pounds each, small but remarkably healthy for triplets at 32 weeks. In the recovery room, a nurse brought forms for the birth certificates. Zoe named them without hesitation. Zara, the firstborn and already showing her fighting spirit. Zara, the quieter middle child. And Zion, the smallest, but most determined. When she reached the section for father's name, Zoe paused, pen hovering over the blank space. For a moment she imagined writing Alexander Sterling III, forcing him to acknowledge these children through official documentation. Instead, she left it blank. He had made his choice. These children deserved better than a father who saw them as disposable. The triplets remained in the NICU for 3 weeks, growing stronger each day. Zoe spent every possible moment with them, learning to feed, change, and comfort 3 newborns simultaneously. Between visits, she worked on her laptop in the hospital waiting room, determined not to fall behind on her projects for Edwin. When the day finally came to bring the babies home, Eleanor arrived with 3 car seats and a practical plan for the first week. "Edwin and I will take shifts helping you," she insisted. "No new mother should handle triplets alone, especially not while working." The first months passed in a sleep-deprived haze. Zoe's days blurred into an endless cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and snatched moments of work. Her tiny apartment became a maze of baby equipment, most of it second-hand or donated by Edwin's family and colleagues. Despite the chaos, Zoe never missed a deadline. She worked while the triplets slept, sometimes going days with only a few hours of rest. Her designs for Thompson Energy Solutions grew increasingly innovative, reflecting solutions she created for her own overwhelmed life. Simplicity, efficiency, intuitive function. Edwin noticed. 6 months after the triplets' birth, he called Zoe into the office for a meeting. "These interface designs you've developed are revolutionary," he said, gesturing to her work displayed on the conference room screens. "They're saving our clients thousands in training costs because they're so intuitive." "When you have 3 babies and need to get work done," Zoe replied with a tired smile, "you learn to design systems that require minimal cognitive load." Edwin studied her, the dark circles under her eyes, the determination in her posture despite obvious exhaustion. "How did you create this entire system between feedings and diaper changes?" Zoe shrugged. "I didn't have a choice. That's what I thought." Edwin slid a folder across the table. "This is your new employment contract. Design director with a substantial raise and stock options." Zoe's hand trembled as she opened the folder. The salary figure made her gasp. "You've earned it," Edwin said firmly. "Now hire a part-time nanny. The company needs more of your brain, and those babies need a mother who isn't running on fumes." By the triplets' first birthday, Zoe had moved to a modest 3-bedroom apartment and hired Mrs. Chen, a grandmother whose gentle efficiency with the babies seemed magical. For the first time since their birth, Zoe slept 6 consecutive hours, an experience so disorienting she woke in a panic, rushing to check on the suspiciously quiet triplets. She found all 3 sleeping peacefully under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye. That evening, after Mrs. Chen had gone home, Zoe sat on the floor with her 3 remarkable creations. Zara, already showing signs of her mother's determination, stacked blocks with fierce concentration. Zion, thoughtful and observant, studied a picture book with unusual focus for a 1-year-old. Zara, sensitive and perceptive, played a simple melody on a toy xylophone, clearly recognizing the pattern of notes. Zoe took a photo of the 3 of them, their identical green-gray eyes, sterling eyes, bright with intelligence and curiosity. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if Alexander ever thought about the child he had rejected, never knowing that one had become 3. She deleted the thought as quickly as it had formed. Alexander Sterling had made his choice. He had no place in the extraordinary future she was building with these children. That night, as her babies slept in their new home, Zoe burned the last photograph of Alexander in a small, private ritual of release. While watching the photo curl and blacken, she couldn't imagine that one day her name would be associated with the century's greatest revolution in sustainable technology, while the Sterling Empire began its slow but inevitable decline. The ashes of Alexander's photograph scattered in the small metal trash can, turning to gray dust that bore no resemblance to the man who had once occupied so much space in Zoe's heart. She watched the last embers die, feeling neither triumph nor grief, only a quiet certainty that she was finally moving forward. 3 years passed like the turning pages of a book written in haste, filled with milestones, challenges, and the relentless forward momentum that comes from raising 3 children while building a career. The triplets grew from wobbly toddlers to energetic preschoolers, each developing distinct personalities that both delighted and exhausted Zoe. On a typical morning in their modest 3-bedroom apartment, Zoe balanced her laptop on one knee while scrambling eggs with her free hand. 3-year-old Zara meticulously arranged her plastic animals by size on the kitchen floor. Zion was absorbed in a picture book about dinosaurs that seemed advanced for a child his age, while Zara hummed a perfect rendition of the classical piece Zoe had played on the radio yesterday. "Mommy, your phone is talking," Zara announced, her perfect pitch apparently extending to the recognition of specific ringtones. Zoe tucked the phone between her ear and shoulder while serving eggs onto 3 small plates. "Zoe Johnson speaking." "Zoe, it's Edwin. I need you in the office as soon as possible." His voice carried an urgency she rarely heard. Planet Core rejected our entire proposal. The design, the interface, everything. The spatula clattered against the counter. Planet Core was the multi-million-dollar client they'd been courting for months. Their contract would have expanded Thompson Energy Solutions into 3 new markets. "That's impossible," she said, lowering her voice as the triplets looked up curiously. They loved the preliminary designs. Their new sustainability director didn't, says it's not innovative enough. Edwin sighed heavily. "We have 48 hours to completely revamp the proposal or we lose them to Westfield Tech." Zoe glanced at her children, their identical green-gray eyes watching her intently. "I'll call Mrs. Chen and be there in an hour." After arranging emergency childcare, Zoe arrived at the sleek downtown offices of Thompson Energy Solutions with her mind already racing through solutions. The company had grown significantly in the 3 years since she'd joined, now occupying 3 floors of a modern glass building with views of Lake Michigan. The design team she now led, 4 talented but inexperienced designers, looked shell-shocked as she entered the conference room. Edwin stood at the head of the table, displaying Planet Core's rejection email on the projection screen. "They called our approach predictable and lacking vision," one of the junior designers said, his voice hollow with defeat. Zoe studied the prototype displays covering the walls, energy management systems designed to help Planet Core's manufacturing facilities reduce their carbon footprint. The work was solid, professional, and indeed, safe. "They're right," she said finally, earning surprised looks from everyone. "We gave them what they asked for, not what they need." She turned to Edwin. "I need 24 hours. That night, after tucking the triplets into bed with extra kisses and apologies for her distraction, Zoe transformed her living room into a design laboratory. Sketches and wireframes covered every surface. Empty coffee cups accumulated as the hours passed. When Zion wandered out at 2 in the morning, puzzled to find his mother still awake, she pulled him onto her lap and explained in simple terms what she was creating. "It's like a brain for buildings," she told him, pointing to her sketches. "It learns what the building needs and gives it only that. No waste." Zion's sleepy eyes widened with interest. "Like how you only give us the right amount of milk so none gets spilled." Zoe kissed the top of his head, struck by the unexpected parallel. "Exactly like that, smart boy." That innocent observation sparked a breakthrough. By morning, fueled by inspiration and caffeine, Zoe had reimagined the entire system. Rather than the standard monitoring approach, she'd designed an adaptive intelligence platform that learned from usage patterns and optimized in real time, like a parent anticipating a child's needs before they became critical. When the triplets woke, they found their normally orderly mother surrounded by chaos, her hair wild, eyes bright with creative fever. Zara immediately began organizing the scattered papers while Zara brought her mother a glass of water. Zion simply sat cross-legged on the floor, studying the drawings with unusual focus for a 3-year-old. "Pretty," he said, pointing to a circular interface design. "That's not pretty, that's functional," corrected Zara, mispronouncing the word with authority. "Functional and pretty," Zoe amended, suddenly seeing the design through her children's eyes. She grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began sketching again, incorporating a more organic, intuitive flow. Mrs. Chen arrived to find the entire Johnson family on the floor, the children coloring while Zoe refined her designs. With an understanding nod, she shooed Zoe toward the bathroom. "You shower, I feed children, then you go save company." The presentation to Planet Core's executives later that day was unlike anything Thompson Energy Solutions had ever attempted. Instead of a standard slideshow, Zoe led with a story about a mother balancing 3 children with different needs, creating systems of efficiency born from necessity. "When you have triplets," she explained, clicking to reveal her radical new interface, "you learn that the most sophisticated systems are actually the simplest. Intelligence isn't about complexity, it's about perfect anticipation." The room fell silent as she demonstrated how the redesigned platform learned and adapted like a living organism, reducing decision fatigue while dramatically improving efficiency. The signature circular interface, inspired by Zion's observation, made complex data instantly comprehensible. "This isn't just an energy management system," she concluded. "It's an intelligent partner that grows with your company." When she finished, Planet Core's sustainability director, the one who had rejected their original proposal, stood up and extended his hand. "We expected a revised proposal. You've given us a revolution, and you've doubled your contract value." Later that evening, In Edwin's corner office with its view of the sunset over Lake Michigan, Zoe finally allowed herself to exhale. The signed contract sat between them, representing not just millions in revenue but a fundamental shift in the company's approach to energy management. Edwin studied her with the penetrating gaze that had first recognized her talent years ago when she was just a pregnant waitress sketching designs on order pads. "I want to make it official," he said finally. "Thompson Johnson Innovations. Your name belongs on the door, Zoe. You've earned it." The weight of the moment, of the recognition she'd fought so hard for, left her momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it was steady and clear. "Thank you for seeing value in me when I was at my lowest." 2 weeks later, Zoe stepped into her own office for the first time, a bright corner space with a small play area where the triplets could visit after preschool. The glass door bore her name alongside Edwin's, and the walls displayed framed copies of her most innovative designs. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Zara looked up from her drawing and asked the question Zoe had been dreading. "Lily at school says everyone has a daddy. Where is our daddy?" The wooden spoon paused over the pasta sauce. Zara and Zion immediately stopped playing, turning with identical curious expressions. 3 pairs of green-gray eyes, Alexander's eyes, waited for her answer. Zoe sat down at the table, choosing her words carefully. Some families are different from others. Some have a mommy and daddy, some have 2 mommies or 2 daddies, and some, like ours, have 1 parent who loves them enough for 2. "But why don't we have a daddy?" persisted Zion. "Because some people aren't ready to be parents," Zoe explained gently. "Your father made his choice before you were born. Our family is special just the way it is." The children seemed to accept this, returning to their activities with the resilience of youth. But that night, after tucking them in, Zoe sat alone in the kitchen, wondering if she'd given them enough truth to satisfy without burdening them with the full cruelty of their father's rejection. The call came just after midnight. Edwin had suffered a heart attack and was in the cardiac unit at Northwestern Memorial. Grabbing her purse and waking the triplets, Zoe rushed them into the car, still in their pajamas. At the hospital, she paced the waiting room with Zara on her hip, while Zara and Zion solemnly colored in the activity books a kind nurse had provided. When the doctor finally appeared, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "It was mild, but he needs complete rest. No work for at least 6 weeks." Edwin, pale but alert, insisted on seeing Zoe before she left. "You'll have to take over," he said without preamble. "The board meeting next week, the quarterly projections, everything. Nobody knows this company better than you do. But the design department, promote Sandra to interim director. You're moving up, Zoe. It's time." The next morning, Zoe faced the company's board of directors across the gleaming conference table, acutely aware of their skepticism. Most were men in their 50s and 60s who had known Edwin for decades. To them, she was still the young designer he had inexplicably elevated. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I've prepared a complete overview of our current projects and strategic initiatives during Edwin's recovery." For the next hour, she presented detailed analyses and projections, demonstrating an understanding of the business that clearly surprised them. When she outlined her strategy for expanding their sustainable building certification program into new markets, even the most skeptical board member leaned forward with interest. That night, after the triplets were finally asleep, Zoe danced silently around her living room, celebrating her first major corporate victory with a glass of wine and music in her earbuds. 3 years ago, she had been a desperate, abandoned woman fighting for survival. Now she was acting CEO of a growing energy solutions company, a respected leader, a mother of 3 remarkable children. As she twirled in her quiet celebration, Zoe couldn't know that her revolutionary energy solution would one day become Zero Sum, the platform that would transform the global real estate market and push Sterling Properties into an existential crisis. As the triplets celebrated their 8th birthday, the Thompson Johnson Innovations headquarters stood as a gleaming testament to how far Zoe had come. 5 years had transformed both the company and the woman who now co-led it, turning a desperate single mother into a respected business leader whose innovations were revolutionizing the energy sector. In the company's state-of-the-art auditorium, Zara stepped confidently to the podium, adjusting the microphone despite it being almost too high for her 8-year-old frame. The audience, mostly adults from prestigious high schools and colleges, watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as she began her presentation on advanced computational algorithms for energy conservation. The fundamental problem with current building management systems, Zara began, her voice steady and articulate, is that they operate on fixed parameters rather than adaptive learning models. From the back of the room, Zoe watched with quiet pride as her daughter proceeded to explain concepts that most college students struggled to grasp. When Zara flawlessly answered complex questions from the judges, the audience's skepticism transformed into stunned admiration. Later that evening, as they celebrated Zara's first-place victory in the National Mathematics Competition for high school students, Edwin raised his glass of sparkling cider. "To Zara, mathematical prodigy," he toasted, then turned to Zion. "And to Zion, whose water purification project is being reviewed by actual scientists at the EPA." Zion beamed, his project on biomimetic filtration having earned recognition from environmental agencies despite being created by an 8-year-old. Next to him, Zara sat quietly, her fingers unconsciously moving in the patterns of the Bach concerto she would perform at her piano recital the following week. "You've created 3 geniuses, Zoe," Edwin remarked, watching the children with the pride of a grandfather. Zoe smiled, touching each child's hair affectionately. "They came this way. I'm just trying to keep up." After the children had gone to bed, Edwin lingered in Zoe's living room, now a comfortable, tastefully decorated space that reflected their improved circumstances. The company's success had allowed Zoe to move from their modest apartment to a spacious townhouse in a good school district, though she maintained the practical frugality that had seen her through harder times. "I need to discuss something with you," Edwin said, his expression unusually serious. "I've been putting it off." The gravity in his voice sent a chill through Zoe. "What is it?" "I saw a specialist last week." Edwin's normally robust frame seemed smaller somehow, his shoulders slightly hunched. "The results came back today." As Edwin explained his diagnosis, aggressive pancreatic cancer with a prognosis of months rather than years, Zoe felt the room tilt beneath her. Edwin had become more than a mentor. He was family, the grandfather her children had never had, the father figure who had believed in her when no one else would. "There are treatments," she began, her mind racing through possibilities. Edwin shook his head gently. "I've reviewed all the options with top oncologists. At my age, with this type of cancer..." He reached for her hand. "I've had a good life, Zoe, but I need to put things in order quickly." The following week, Zoe sat in a sleek downtown law office beside Edwin as his attorneys outlined the succession plan. The legal language washed over her in waves until one phrase caught her attention. "Controlling interest to be divided as follows," the attorney read. 40% to remain with Edwin Thompson until his death, then to be transferred to Zara, Zion, and Zara Johnson in equal shares. 40% to Zoe Johnson Thompson, effective immediately. Zoe turned to Edwin in shock. "That's 80% of the company." Edwin nodded, his expression resolute. "You built as much of this company as I did. It's only right that you and the children control its future. But your family will be well taken care of through my other assets." Edwin's tone left no room for argument. "This company is your legacy now, Zoe. Yours and the children's." In the months that followed, as Edwin's condition deteriorated, Zoe divided her time between the hospital, the children, and the increasingly demanding responsibility of running the company. Each night, after helping with homework and bedtime routines, she would open her laptop and continue refining the project that had consumed her creative energy for months, a comprehensive building intelligence system that would take everything they'd learned and elevate it to an entirely new level. On a particularly difficult day, After receiving news that Edwin's treatment options had been exhausted, Zoe brought her laptop to his hospital room. His once robust frame had withered, but his eyes remained sharp and engaged as she connected her computer to the room's display screen. "I want you to see this before anyone else," she said, opening the prototype interface. "I'm calling it Zero Sum." For the next hour, she demonstrated how the system worked, not merely monitoring energy usage but actively learning from it, predicting needs, eliminating waste, and optimizing resources in real time. The circular interface she had first sketched years ago, inspired by her son's observation, had evolved into an elegant, intuitive design that made complex data instantly accessible. "This isn't just an improvement on what we've been doing," she explained. "It's a completely new paradigm, buildings that think, learn, and adapt like living organisms." Edwin watched with growing amazement. "This will change everything," he said finally, his voice weak but filled with conviction. "This is our legacy, Zoe." 2 weeks later, Edwin Thompson was buried on a crisp autumn day, the ceremony attended by business leaders, politicians, and clients whose buildings had been transformed by his company's innovations. Zoe stood at the graveside, a child holding each of her hands, their small faces solemn but composed. They had known Edwin was dying and had said their goodbyes in their own ways. Zara by creating a mathematical proof and naming it after him, Zion by planting a tree in their backyard, Zara by composing a simple, haunting melody that she played for him days before he passed. As the mourners dispersed, many stopped to offer condolences and, inevitably, questions about the company's future. Though Edwin's succession plan had been made clear, uncertainty lingered. Zoe heard the whispers, saw the speculative glances. A single mother of 3 taking over a company valued at nearly $2 billion. The skepticism was palpable. The first board meeting after Edwin's death confirmed her suspicions. Seated at the head of the table, Edwin's place, Zoe faced 12 men and 2 women, most of whom had known Edwin for decades. "With all due respect to Edwin's wishes," said Richard Harmon, the longest-serving board member, "we need to discuss interim leadership while we conduct a proper executive search." Zoe met his gaze steadily. "My leadership is not interim, Richard. As majority shareholder and Edwin's named successor, I am the CEO of this company." "Ms. Johnson," another board member interjected, "running a household and running a billion-dollar corporation are entirely different challenges. A single mother cannot possibly—" "A single mother of triplets," Zoe interrupted, her voice level but firm, "has already been running half this company for the past year while caring for Edwin through his illness and raising 3 exceptional children. If you gentlemen feel that requires less skill, intelligence, or dedication than being CEO, I suggest you try it." The silence that followed was broken by Eleanor Thompson, Edwin's widow and a board member herself. "My husband knew exactly what he was doing when he named Zoe his successor. Anyone who questions that questions his judgment, and mine." 3 months later, Zoe stood on a stage at the National Clean Energy Summit introducing Zero Sum to the world. The platform's launch exceeded even her most optimistic projections, with the company's stock price jumping 300% in a single day as investors recognized the revolutionary potential of the system. Back at the newly redesigned headquarters, Zoe walked through the main lobby where twin portraits now hung side by side, Edwin Thompson and Zoe Johnson Thompson, the company's founders. Below them, a display showcased the earliest prototype of what would become Zero Sum, alongside Zoe's original napkin sketches from her waitressing days. In her office, reviewing the flood of licensing requests that had poured in since the launch, Zoe paused at a familiar logo: Sterling Properties, Alexander's company. Her finger hovered over the screen as memories flashed unbidden: his cruel dismissal, the envelope of cash, the words that had cut deeper than any knife. "Women like you are disposable in Manhattan." With clinical detachment, she searched for recent news about Sterling Properties. The results showed a company in trouble, over-leveraged, losing market share, facing lawsuits over ethical violations. Alexander Sterling III was mentioned primarily in connection with expensive divorces and failed development projects. After a moment's consideration, Zoe approved the Sterling Properties license request, but with terms significantly more stringent than those offered to other clients. A small, petty victory, perhaps, but satisfying nonetheless. As she signed the digital approval, Zoe couldn't know that she was planting the first seed of what would be, in 4 years, a public confrontation that would forever change the balance of power between her and the man who had discarded her. The signature on the Sterling Properties contract dried in digital pixels on Zoe's screen, a small flicker of satisfaction warming her chest. 8 years had passed since Alexander had deemed her disposable, yet the memory still retained its sting, however dulled by time and success. "Mom, look what I found!" Zara's voice cut through Zoe's thoughts as her daughter burst into the home office, laptop in hand. At 10, Zara had already developed her mother's drive combined with an analytical mind that processed information with startling efficiency. Zoe minimized the Sterling contract, turning her attention to her daughter. "What have you discovered now, my little researcher?" Zara placed her laptop on the desk, her expression unusually serious. "I was doing a genealogy project for school, about family histories." She pointed to the screen, which displayed a news article featuring a distinguished-looking man in his 40s. "This man has the same eyes as us, the exact same color." Zoe's breath caught. Alexander Sterling III stared back from the screen, his green-gray eyes, the eyes he had passed to all 3 of her children, unmistakable in the Forbes profile about struggling legacy businesses. "His name is Alexander Sterling," Zara continued, scrutinizing her mother's face. "When I searched our unusual eye color, the Sterling family came up multiple times. They're known for it." She paused, her 10-year-old face suddenly looking much older. "Is he related to us, Mom?" Zoe closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. She had known this day would come, had prepared for it, yet still felt blindsided. "Where are your brother and sister?" she asked quietly. "Downstairs. Zion's working on his water filtration thing and Zara's practicing piano. Can you ask them to come up, please? I think it's time we had a family discussion." Minutes later, all 3 children sat on the couch in Zoe's home office, identical eyes watching her with varying expressions. Zara's calculating, Zion's thoughtful, Zara's intuitive. Zoe began carefully. "The man you found, Alexander Sterling, is your biological father." The silence that followed felt heavier than any noise could have been. "Why isn't he here with us?" Zion finally asked, his voice small but direct. Zoe sat across from them, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. "Because he made a choice not to be part of our family. Before you were born, when I told him I was pregnant, he decided he didn't want to be a father." "He didn't want us?" Zion's brow furrowed in confusion. "Was it because we did something wrong?" Zara added, her sensitive nature immediately assuming blame. "No, sweetheart." Zoe moved to kneel in front of them, taking their hands in hers. "You did nothing wrong. You didn't even exist yet when he made his choice. The failure was his, not yours. Some adults aren't prepared to be parents, even when they should be." "But why?" persisted Zara, ever needing to understand the logic behind emotions. "Was he poor? Sick?" "No," Zoe said, deciding they deserved honesty, if not the full cruelty of the rejection. "He was wealthy and healthy. He simply decided that his life plans didn't include being a father at that time." "Did he know we were triplets?" Zion asked. "Number I discovered that after he was no longer in contact with me." The questions continued through dinner, thoughtful, sometimes painfully direct questions that Zoe answered as honestly as she could without burdening them with the complete brutality of Alexander's abandonment. She explained how Edwin had stepped in, becoming the father figure in their lives, how families took many forms, and how their unconventional family had thrived despite the challenges. That night, After the children had gone to bed, Zoe found Zara still awake, her laptop glowing in the darkness. "More research?" Zoe asked gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I want to understand who he is," Zara replied, her young face serious in the blue light of the screen. "If half our DNA comes from him, I should know what that means." Zoe stroked her daughter's hair. "Just remember that DNA is only the beginning of who you are. What you do with your life matters more than genetic inheritance." "Like you did," Zara said, looking up with surprising insight. "You built something important without him." "We built it together," Zoe corrected, kissing her forehead. "You, me, Zion, and Zara. Now go to sleep, my brilliant girl." The following month brought a new milestone in Zoe's career. A sleek black town car delivered her to the Fortune magazine photo shoot in downtown Chicago, where photographers and journalists awaited the woman who had transformed Thomson Johnson Innovations into one of the fastest-growing companies in sustainable technology. "Ms. Johnson Thompson," the magazine's editor greeted her, "we're thrilled to feature you in our 50 Most Powerful Women in Business issue." The interview took place in Zoe's office, a thoughtfully designed space that balanced professional authority with personal warmth. Photos of the triplets adorned her desk alongside awards and recognition for the company's innovations. "Your story is remarkable," the journalist commented, reviewing her notes. "A single mother of triplets who built a multi-billion-dollar company. Our readers will be fascinated." "The company was already established when I joined," Zoe corrected modestly. "Edwin Thompson was the true visionary. But Zero Sum was entirely your creation, correct? The platform that's revolutionizing how commercial buildings manage energy?" As the interview continued, Zoe carefully navigated questions about her personal life, sharing enough of her journey to be authentic without exposing her children to unwanted scrutiny. When school ended that afternoon, the triplets visited headquarters, a regular occurrence that the staff had grown accustomed to. The Fortune photographers, still on site, asked for permission to capture a few candid moments of the CEO with her children. "They're extraordinary," the photographer remarked, reviewing the images of the three 10-year-olds confidently navigating the corporate environment. "You can see the intelligence in their eyes." "Their eyes." Alexander's eyes. Zoe nodded non-committally. 2 weeks later, the article appeared. "From Waitress to Billionaire: The Extraordinary Journey of Zoe Johnson Thompson." The cover featured Zoe in a tailored cobalt suit, standing confidently with her 3 children. The piece detailed her rise from struggling single mother to innovator and CEO, emphasizing her resilience and vision. What Zoe couldn't know was that the magazine would find its way to Alexander Sterling's desk in Manhattan. In his significantly downsized office, Alexander's hand froze as he flipped to the cover story. The woman staring back at him bore little resemblance to the young, vulnerable Zoe he had dismissed 12 years ago. This Zoe exuded confidence and success, her posture regal, her smile knowing. But it was the 3 children beside her that caused his whiskey glass to slip from his fingers, shattering on the floor. 3 young faces with unmistakable Sterling features, the high cheekbones, the particular set of the jaw, and most distinctively, the green-gray eyes that had marked Sterling descendants for generations. "Triplets," he whispered, scanning the article with growing agitation. The piece mentioned her 3 10-year-old children, but offered no details about their parentage. "Mr. Sterling?" His secretary entered cautiously, eyeing the broken glass. "Is everything all right?" He couldn't tear his eyes from the image. "Find out everything you can about Zoe Johnson Thompson and her children." "Sir, the attorneys are waiting in the conference room. About the bankruptcy protection filing?" Alexander waved her off impatiently. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." After the secretary left, he studied the children's faces more carefully. The 2 girls and 1 boy looked healthy, intelligent, well-dressed, clearly raised with advantages he had assumed Zoe could never provide. According to the article, they were already showing remarkable talents, one a mathematical prodigy, One an environmental science innovator, one artistically gifted. With shaking hands, he reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Jenkins? It's Alexander Sterling. I need your investigation services. Discreetly." He paused, staring at the magazine cover. "I need everything you can find on 3 children. And their mother." That evening, in Chicago, Zoe opened an email from the organizing committee of the Global Sustainable Technology Summit in New York. They were inviting her to deliver the keynote address and receive their Innovator of the Decade award. The venue would be the Plaza Hotel, the very location where 13 years ago, Alexander had pretended not to know her when they accidentally crossed paths at an event. Her finger hovered over the "Accept" button. She hadn't returned to Manhattan since her desperate escape. The city held too many painful memories. Her contemplation was interrupted by the triplets bursting into her home office, excited from their day at school. "Mom, can we come with you to New York?" they asked in unison, having obviously overheard her phone conversation with her assistant about the invitation. "We've never seen where you grew up," Zara added. "Or where you went to college," Zion chimed in. Zoe looked at their eager faces and felt a moment of hesitation. Taking them to New York meant potentially exposing them to the world that had once rejected them before they were even born. "Please?" Zara pressed, her analytical mind already planning the educational value of such a trip. Zoe took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, of course you can. It's time you knew your roots." That night, as she accepted the invitation and began planning their trip, Zoe couldn't know that Alexander Sterling was obsessively studying photos of her children, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had rejected on that fateful night. While Alexander Sterling studied photographs of children who shared his distinctive eyes, Zoe Johnson Thompson's private jet began its descent toward New York City. After 12 years of deliberate absence, she was returning not as the broken, desperate woman who had fled, but as a business titan whose innovations had revolutionized an industry. "Mom, look!" Zara pressed her face against the window as the Manhattan skyline emerged through the clouds. "It's exactly like in the movies." Beside her, Zion consulted the travel guide he'd been studying for weeks. "That's the Empire State Building, and over there is One World Trade Center." Zara, always the most perceptive of the triplets, noticed her mother's white-knuckled grip on the armrest. "Are you okay, Mom?" Zoe forced a smile. "Just a little nervous. It's been a long time since I've been back." The truth was more complicated. As the familiar skyline came into view, memories flooded back with unexpected force. The tiny apartment in Queens, the hospital room where she'd nearly lost her pregnancy, the cafe where she'd served wealthy patrons while her ankles swelled and her heart broke. The jet touched down at Teterboro Airport, where a sleek black limousine awaited to transport them to Manhattan. As they approached the city, Zoe felt a strange disconnection, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The New York she had known, a place of struggle and heartbreak, bore little resemblance to the experience she was having now. "Four Seasons Hotel," announced the driver as they pulled up to the luxury property on 57th Street. A team of staff immediately materialized to handle their luggage. "Ms. Johnson Thompson, welcome to New York," greeted the general manager, who had come personally to meet them. "We've prepared the presidential suite as requested." The triplets exchanged excited glances, still not entirely accustomed to the trappings of wealth despite having grown up with increasing privilege. Zoe observed their reactions, grateful that success hadn't spoiled them, that they still found wonder in experiences rather than entitlement. After settling into the opulent suite with its panoramic views of Central Park, Zoe announced, "Today I want to show you where I came from." Their first stop was Queens, where Zoe directed the driver to her old neighborhood. The modest apartment building looked smaller than she remembered, its brick facade worn but dignified. "You lived here?" Zara asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But it's so small." "Apartment 3B, Zoe confirmed, gazing up at the windows. about the size of your closet in Chicago." "The whole apartment?" Zara clarified, struggling to comprehend. "The whole apartment," Zoe repeated softly. Next, they visited Columbia University, where Zoe walked the triplets through the campus that had once represented her brightest hopes. "It was at a fundraiser in that building there." She pointed to an elegant stone structure. "Where I met your father. I was serving canapés to wealthy donors, and he was one of them." The children exchanged glances, absorbing this rare mention of their father without comment. Their final stop was the cafe near Central Park where Zoe had once worked as a waitress during her pregnancy. "Zoe Johnson? Is that really you?" The elderly owner emerged from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile. "Look at you now. A regular Cinderella story." To Zoe's surprise, he led them to a wall near the register where photographs of notable customers hung. Among them was a faded picture of a much younger Zoe in a waitress uniform, her smile tired but determined. "Kept it up there all these years," the owner said proudly. "Tell everyone who comes in that the famous Zoe Johnson Thompson once served coffee right here." The triplets stared at the photograph in fascination, seeing a version of their mother they'd never known, young, vulnerable, her pregnancy barely visible beneath the apron. Unknown to Zoe, a business reporter who happened to be having coffee recognized her and discreetly took photos. By evening, the story was circulating online. The Cinderella CEO returns to her origins. While the Johnsons toured Manhattan, Alexander Sterling sat in his significantly reduced office space, now occupying just half a floor in a building his company no longer owned outright. Spread across his desk were newspapers and magazines featuring Zoe's success story, along with the preliminary report from his investigator. "Triplets," he muttered, studying a particularly clear photograph of the children. "She was carrying triplets and I—" He couldn't finish the thought, the magnitude of his cruelty finally registering after 12 years of rationalization. His secretary interrupted his brooding with a reminder about creditors waiting on the line. That evening, Zoe attended a pre-summit dinner for keynote speakers at the renowned Le Bernardin. She wore a burgundy Valentino gown that accentuated her graceful figure, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo. As she entered the private dining room, conversations paused, heads turned, and eyes followed her progress to her assigned table. Throughout the evening, CEOs, environmental leaders, and tech innovators made their way to her table, eager to establish connections with the woman whose zero-sum platform was revolutionizing their industries. Zoe navigated the attention with the practiced ease of someone who had earned her place at the table. "Zoe Johnson," a cultured female voice interrupted as Zoe stepped away for a moment of quiet. "Or should I say Johnson Thompson now?" Zoe turned to find herself face-to-face with a striking woman in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in Chanel. "I'm Rebecca Hamilton," the woman continued. "I believe we have an acquaintance in common." The name registered immediately. Rebecca Hamilton, the woman Alexander had been expected to marry, the woman he had deemed worthy when Zoe was not. "Ms. Hamilton," Zoe acknowledged, maintaining her composure, "this is unexpected. Please call me Rebecca." She smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "I've followed your remarkable rise with great interest. Not many people reinvent themselves so completely." "Necessity is a powerful motivator," Zoe replied carefully. Rebecca studied her with undisguised curiosity. Alexander never recovered after he lost the Sterling inheritance. 3 divorces and nearly bankrupt now. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He keeps your Fortune article in his desk drawer. I'm not sure if it's obsession or regret." The casual revelation struck Zoe like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Rebecca was called away by another guest, leaving Zoe alone with the unsettling information. The ride back to the hotel was quiet, the Manhattan skyline glittering through the limousine windows. Zoe stared at the familiar yet foreign landscape, her mind replaying Rebecca's words. Alexander Sterling, once the embodiment of privilege and power in her mind, reduced to keeping her magazine article in his desk. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it left her oddly hollow. In the hotel suite, after checking that the triplets were sleeping soundly in their connected room, Zoe stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city that had once broken her heart. Tomorrow she would stand on stage at the Plaza Hotel, the very place where Alexander had once pretended not to know her, and accept an award as one of the most influential innovators of the decade. The symmetry was almost too perfect, like something from a screenplay rather than real life. Yet here she was, 12 years later, a success beyond anything she could have imagined in her darkest moments. As she prepared for bed, Zoe made a silent promise to herself. Tomorrow she would maintain absolute composure, regardless of what memories the plaza might evoke. She would accept her award, deliver her speech, and focus solely on the future, her company, her children, her continued success. As she contemplated the Manhattan skyline from her suite window, Zoe couldn't imagine that in less than 24 hours, she would be face-to-face with Alexander Sterling in the most public and explosive moment of their intertwined lives. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Four Seasons presidential suite as Zoe stood before the full-length mirror, examining her reflection with critical eyes. For today's summit, she had chosen a Valentino ensemble in deep crimson, the color of power, of revolution, of blood. The tailored jacket and slim trousers accentuated her athletic frame, while the subtle gold accessories spoke of success without ostentation. "Perfect," whispered her stylist, stepping back to admire the overall effect. "You look absolutely commanding." Zoe nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. Today wasn't about looking beautiful, it was about embodying authority. The woman who would stand on stage at the Plaza Hotel bore no resemblance to the desperate, heartbroken girl who had once served canapés to the wealthy in that same space. A soft knock at the door announced the triplets, already dressed in coordinated outfits that complemented their mothers. Navy blue blazers over crisp white shirts, their identical green-gray eyes bright with excitement. "Ready?" Zoe asked, drinking in the sight of them. These three miraculous beings who had transformed her life, her reason for everything. "Born ready," Zara replied with her characteristic confidence, adjusting her glasses. At 10, she already carried herself with the self-assurance of someone much older. The journey to the plaza was surprisingly emotional for Zoe. As their limousine navigated Manhattan's crowded streets, memories flooded back, not just of Alexander, but of her younger self, hurrying along these same sidewalks with dreams and ambitions that seemed so modest compared to what she had actually achieved. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel gleamed with old-world opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over the gathered elite of American business: CEOs, venture capitalists, tech visionaries, and sustainability pioneers, all mingling in a carefully choreographed dance of power and influence. Near the back of the room, Alexander Sterling III nursed a tumbler of 18-year-old Macallan, a drink he could no longer comfortably afford but maintained as part of his increasingly threadbare facade of success. At 45, he showed unmistakable signs of his decline, the once perfect suit slightly shiny at the elbows, fine lines etched around eyes that had witnessed the gradual disintegration of the Sterling empire. 3 divorces had drained his personal fortune, while lawsuits over ethical violations had tarnished the Sterling name beyond easy repair. His presence at the summit was a desperate play, a last attempt to forge connections that might save his company from the bankruptcy proceedings his attorneys were frantically trying to delay. The irony of seeking salvation at a sustainability conference wasn't lost on him. Sterling Properties had consistently lobbied against environmental regulations throughout its existence. A sudden hush fell over the crowd, the kind of collective intake of breath that signals the arrival of true importance. Alexander turned, his gaze drawn to the entrance along with everyone else's. Zoe Johnson-Thompson stood framed in the doorway, the crimson of her suit drawing every eye like a flame in darkness. But it wasn't her elegant attire that caused Alexander's grip to falter on his whiskey glass. It was the three children who flanked her, moving with the easy confidence of those born to privilege. Three children, identical green-gray eyes, the distinctive sterling bone structure evident in their young faces. "Impossible," he whispered, the liquor burning his throat as he swallowed convulsively. As Zoe moved through the crowd, people parted before her like water around the prow of a ship. The triplets stayed close, their poise remarkable for children their age. Alexander couldn't tear his eyes away from them, searching their features, cataloging the undeniable sterling traits, the slight cleft in the boy's chin, the particular arch of the girl's eyebrows, and those eyes, the eyes that had marked his family for generations. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, his voice resonating through the ballroom. "Our honoree this evening, the visionary who has revolutionized sustainable technology, generating more than 10,000 jobs and saving businesses $2.7 billion annually in energy costs, Dr. Zoe Johnson-Thompson." Thunderous applause filled the room as Zoe ascended to the stage with graceful confidence. The triplets took their seats in the front row, applauding with obvious pride. Alexander remained frozen at the back of the room, his body physically present while his mind reeled with implications. Triplets. She had been carrying triplets when he'd handed her an envelope of cash and told her to take care of it, when he'd called her disposable. Zoe's voice, strong and measured, cut through his spiraling thoughts. "When they told me I didn't have what it took to survive in this world," she was saying, her eyes scanning the rapt audience, "I transformed that rejection into determination. When I was abandoned, pregnant, and without resources, I promised that my children would never know the scarcity of opportunities or love." Each word landed like a precise blow. Though she mentioned no names, the personal nature of her narrative was unmistakable to the one person who recognized himself in her story. Alexander barely registered the rest of her speech, something about innovation born from necessity, about sustainable systems that mirrored life's resilience. He was too busy staring at the three children in the front row, their poised attention to their mother's words suggesting intelligence and education he had never imagined possible when he dismissed Zoe as beneath his station. During the reception that followed the award ceremony, Alexander maneuvered through the crowd with deliberate casualness, working his way toward Zoe, who was engaged in conversation with the mayor of New York. "Zoe?" he interrupted, his voice betraying more nervousness than he'd intended. "It's been a long time." She turned slowly, her expression transforming into a mask of professional composure. Not a flicker of surprise crossed her features, as though she had been expecting this encounter all along. "Mr. Sterling," she acknowledged coolly, "I didn't expect to see you here considering sustainability has never been a priority for your enterprises." The dismissive accuracy of her assessment stung. Alexander's gaze darted nervously toward the triplets, who were across the room conversing with a group of investors. Their easy confidence in this environment, his environment, was jarring. "We need to talk," he insisted, lowering his voice. "Privately." "We have nothing to discuss either privately or publicly," Zoe replied calmly, the slight emphasis on privately making it clear she remembered all too well his preference for keeping her hidden. "Those children—" Alexander's voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "They're my children, aren't they? I saw the Fortune article. Why didn't you tell me they were triplets?" Zoe arched an eyebrow, the gesture somehow conveying years of accumulated strength. "You gave me $10,000 to solve the problem and told me I was disposable. You blocked my number when I was hospitalized trying to save my pregnancy. What exactly should I have said, and to whom?" Their conversation had begun to attract discreet attention. Alexander noticed several executives watching, some whispering behind cupped hands. His public standing, already precarious, couldn't withstand a scene. "Do they know who I am?" he asked anxiously, his eyes again finding the triplets across the room. They know they have a mother who would do anything for them, Zoe replied evenly. The rest has never been relevant. Desperation flared in Alexander's chest. In one terrible moment, he saw clearly what he had thrown away. Not just 3 remarkable children who carried his bloodline, but a woman whose strength and intelligence had built an empire while his crumbled. He grasped her arm, the action born of panic rather than intent. You can't deny my right to know them. I have resources, lawyers. Mr. Sterling, Zoe interrupted, firmly removing his hand from her arm. Your resources are rapidly disappearing, according to the Wall Street Journal. As for lawyers, my legal team would be delighted to discuss 12 years of unpaid child support with interest. That would be approximately $2.3 million? More than you can currently afford, I imagine. Alexander's face paled as he saw the triplets approaching, drawn perhaps by the tension in their mother's posture. Mom, said one of the girls, the one with glasses and an analytical gaze. Dr. Chen from MIT wants to discuss my algorithm project. Alexander stared at the 3 children, seeing his own image reflected in young faces he had never known. Children, Zoe said in a controlled voice. This is Alexander Sterling, a former acquaintance. Mr. Sterling, these are my children, Zara, Zion, and Zara. The triplets offered polite handshakes, no recognition in their eyes. You are extraordinary, Alexander stammered, suddenly feeling every one of his 45 years. Thank you, sir, the boy, Zion, responded politely. We're familiar with your company. We studied the Sterling Properties case in our business ethics class as an example of unsustainable business practices. Alexander blanched further, aware of the other executives nearby attempting to hide their smiles. If you'll excuse us, Zoe said smoothly, we have an appointment with the governor. As they moved away, Alexander desperately grabbed Zoe's arm one last time. Please, he implored, his voice loud enough to be heard by several nearby guests. You don't understand. I'm losing everything. The company is on the brink of bankruptcy. I need you. Them. Zoe removed his hand again, this time with unmistakable firmness. Exactly as I needed you 12 years ago, Alexander. The difference is that you chose to abandon me. I am choosing to move forward. While she walked away with dignity, leaving Alexander surrounded by curious stares and whispers, Zoe couldn't know that the morning headlines about their explosive encounter would be merely the prelude to her most audacious business move yet. The flash of cameras illuminated Zoe's retreating figure as she guided her children through the crowd, her spine straight as steel despite the encounter that had just shaken her more than she cared to admit. Alexander Sterling stood abandoned in her wake, a fitting reversal of fortunes that wasn't lost on the business elite witnessing the exchange. The murmurs followed her like ripples in water, but Zoe maintained her composure until she and the triplets were safely inside their waiting limousine. Mom? Zara's sensitive eyes studied her face. Are you okay? Zoe exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders releasing incrementally. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just an unexpected conversation. The ride back to the Four Seasons passed in relative silence, the children exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their perception of what had transpired. Zoe watched the familiar Manhattan streets slide by, feeling strangely detached from the woman who had once trudged those same sidewalks with swollen ankles and a broken heart. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the suite's windows as Zoe unfolded the New York Times business section. Her breath caught at the headline, Technology Titan and Failing Heir, Johnson Thompson and Sterling's tense plaza encounter raises questions. The article detailed the visibly uncomfortable confrontation between self-made billionaire Zoe Johnson Thompson and struggling former real estate magnate Alexander Sterling III, noting rumors of a personal connection and speculating about Sterling's apparent distress when speaking with her children. Zoe folded the paper with deliberate care, placing it aside just as the triplets emerged from their adjoining room for breakfast. They settled around the suite's dining table, where room service had arranged an elaborate spread, but Zoe immediately noticed their distraction. Each had a tablet, and their focus was notably absent from the gourmet offerings before them. "What's so interesting this morning?" she asked, pouring herself coffee with a steadiness she didn't entirely feel. "That man from last night," Zara said, her intuitive nature as always cutting straight to the heart of matters. "We're researching him." Zoe's cup paused midway to her lips. "And why would you be doing that?" "Because he has our eyes," Zara replied directly, her analytical gaze unwavering. "And because you never get tense like that with anyone." The triplets watched her with identical expressions. Not accusation, but a quiet demand for truth. Zoe placed her cup on the table, suddenly understanding that the moment she had carefully prepared for over years had arrived without warning. "I think it's time for a conversation I've put off for too long," she said quietly. After breakfast, Zoe led her children to Central Park, seeking privacy amid the public space. They walked along the winding paths until finding a secluded bench overlooking the lake, far enough from other visitors to speak freely. "Alexander Sterling is your biological father," Zoe began, though this was not news after their conversation months ago. "What I haven't told you is the full story of what happened between us." With measured words, Zoe finally revealed everything. The relationship with Alexander, the pregnancy announcement dinner, his cruel dismissal, the envelope of cash, the bleeding, the hospital stay where he never came, the blocked phone number, the desperate struggle to survive while carrying 3 babies instead of 1. The triplets listened in silence, their expressions shifting through shock, confusion, and finally, a quiet anger that seemed too mature for their 10 years. "Why are you telling us now?" Zion asked, always the pragmatic one, always seeking the logic behind emotions. "Because you deserve the truth," Zoe answered, meeting each of their gazes in turn, "and because he will probably try to contact you." The prediction proved accurate with unsettling speed. That afternoon, the hotel's concierge personally delivered 3 large packages to their suite. Inside each box lay the latest iPhone models, 3 MacBook Pros, and handwritten cards pleading for a chance to meet. "Typical," Zoe murmured, examining the lavish gifts. "He thinks he can buy relationships." The suite's phone began ringing insistently throughout the afternoon. After the 6th call, Zoe finally answered, her voice cool and professional. "My lawyers will be contacting yours," Alexander said without preamble, his tone a mixture of desperation and entitlement. "I want visitation rights. They're my heirs, part of the Sterling lineage." "Heirs to what, exactly?" Zoe responded, keeping her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. "A failing company? A man who rejected them before they were even born? They already have a legacy, the one we've built together." After disconnecting, Zoe found the triplets in quiet conference in their room, their expressions uncommonly serious. "What happens now?" Zara asked, her artistic sensitivity making her particularly attuned to emotional undercurrents. "That's up to you," Zoe said, surprising them. "You're old enough to form your own opinions. If you want to meet him properly, I won't stand in your way." The triplets exchanged looks, their silent communication a phenomenon Zoe had witnessed countless times but never fully understood. After several minutes of discussion among themselves, they reached a decision that seemed unanimous despite no audible agreement. "We want to see him," Zara announced. "Once, without you there." "To form our own assessment," Zion added. Zoe nodded, respecting their maturity while feeling an unexpected pang of anxiety. "I'll arrange it for tomorrow." While the children prepared for their meeting with Alexander, Zoe sequestered herself in the suite's office area, her focus shifting to business. With calm determination, she opened a secure connection to her company's servers and finalized instructions to her executive team and attorneys. The acquisition strategy had been months in planning, calculated down to the precise timing. The following morning, the triplets departed in a hotel car for a neutral meeting place. A private room at a cafe halfway between the Four Seasons and Alexander's significantly less prestigious address. Zoe kissed each of them, resisting the urge to prepare them further or influence their perceptions. While they were gone, Zoe completed the most significant acquisition of her career, the controlling purchase of Sterling Properties itself, leveraging its plummeting stock price and vulnerable position. Alexander, consumed with meeting his newfound children, remained oblivious to the corporate takeover happening simultaneously. 3 hours later, the triplets returned to the suite, their expressions reflecting an emotional exhaustion beyond their years. "How was it?" Zoe asked nervously, searching their faces for signs of distress. "Educational," Zara replied, removing her glasses to clean them methodically. "He cried a lot. He tried to impress us with stories about sterling greatness," Zion added, his tone suggesting the attempt had fallen flat. "And he said we could save the family legacy if you and he reconciled," Zara completed, her sensitive nature clearly disturbed by the encounter. "It was uncomfortable." "What did you tell him?" Zoe asked carefully. "That we already have a legacy," Zara said with unexpected firmness. "The Johnson-Thompson legacy." At the airport that evening, as they prepared to board the private jet back to Chicago, Zoe received an urgent message from her financial director. The acquisition of Sterling Properties was complete. She now controlled the empire that had once deemed her unworthy. Almost simultaneously, across Manhattan, Alexander received an emergency call from his board. His last significant asset now belonged to the woman he had discarded. As the jet soared above the clouds, Zoe gazed out the window at Manhattan disappearing beneath them. The vindication she had imagined for years felt different in reality, not the sharp satisfaction of revenge but a quieter sense of completion. The circle was closed, the past finally buried. "Where are we going now, Mom?" Zion asked, settling into the seat beside her. Zoe smiled, touching her son's face, the face Alexander Sterling would never truly know. "To the future," she answered. "Exactly where we've always been heading." In his empty Manhattan apartment, Alexander Sterling stared at the Fortune magazine cover showing Zoe and the triplets, finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just a family, but an empire, respect, and the legacy he had valued so highly. The impulsive decision to abandon a disposable woman 12 years ago had proven to be his greatest strategic and personal failure. The Fortune magazine slipped from Alexander's trembling fingers, landing on the bare hardwood floors of his once lavish penthouse, now stripped of many valuables to cover mounting debts. The glossy images of Zoe and their children, his children, stared back at him from the floor, their success a mirror reflecting his colossal failure. As the magnitude of his loss crystallized in his mind, media outlets across the country exploded with the news of Zoe Johnson-Thompson's audacious acquisition. Breaking: abandoned mother acquires ex's company in ultimate corporate revenge, screamed the New York Post headline. More measured publications like the Wall Street Journal opted for Thompson Johnson Innovations acquires struggling Sterling Properties in surprise takeover, while noting the personal history between the company's principals in smaller type. In Chicago, Zoe's jet touched down under a brilliant autumn sky. The triplets chatted animatedly about their upcoming science fair projects, the encounter with Alexander seemingly processed and filed away with the efficiency of their analytical minds. Zoe envied their resilience, their ability to compartmentalize. For her, the confrontation had reopened wounds she thought long healed. The following morning, Zoe faced a video conference with Sterling Properties' executive team, men and women who had never taken her seriously when Alexander was at the helm. Their faces now showed a mixture of apprehension and relief, fear of the new owner, but relief that someone with proven business acumen might save their jobs. "Good morning," Zoe began, her voice steady and authoritative. "I understand this transition comes as a surprise to many of you." Richard Vanderholt, Sterling's longest-serving executive, cleared his throat. Ms. Johnson-Thompson, the board is grateful for your intervention. The company was facing imminent Chapter 11 proceedings. I'm aware, Zoe replied. And please understand that this acquisition isn't about personal history. It's about business potential. Sterling Properties has valuable assets and market position despite recent mismanagement. The executives exchanged glances, understanding the implicit criticism of Alexander's leadership. My first action as majority shareholder, Zoe continued, will be to implement a complete restructuring and rebranding. Effective immediately, Sterling Properties will become Legacy Sustainable Development. A murmur ran through the assembled executives. The Sterling name, the century-old brand that Alexander had prized above all else, erased with a single decision. The past of this company is tied to the Sterling name, Zoe explained, her tone businesslike but firm. Its future lies in sustainability. My team will begin the transition immediately. As the meeting concluded, Zoe's assistant appeared in her office doorway. Ms. Johnson-Thompson, security reports that Alexander Sterling is in the lobby, demanding to see you. He's becoming disruptive. Zoe closed her eyes briefly, steeling herself. Tell security I'm in meetings all day. 3 days later, as Zoe reviewed architectural plans for the Legacy headquarters redesign, her office door burst open. Her normally unflappable receptionist appeared flustered. I'm so sorry, Ms. Johnson-Thompson. Mr. Sterling is here. He somehow got past building security. Before Zoe could respond, Alexander pushed into the office. The contrast between them couldn't have been more stark. Zoe in an impeccably tailored designer suit, radiating success and control. Alexander disheveled, his once expensive shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot from what appeared to be days without proper sleep. You took my company, he said, his voice hoarse. My family's legacy. Everything. Zoe nodded to her receptionist, who withdrew, closing the door. I acquired a failing business at market value, Alexander. Your family's legacy was already in ruins before I entered the picture. You did this for revenge, he accused, pacing the expansive office with erratic movements. To punish me for what happened 12 years ago. Not everything is about you, Zoe replied, her composure absolute. This was a business decision. Sterling Properties has valuable assets that align with our sustainability initiatives. Alexander stopped pacing, his gaze falling on the 3 framed photographs on Zoe's desk, Zara accepting a mathematics award, Zion at an environmental science competition, Zara at her piano recital. They're extraordinary, he whispered, his anger momentarily displaced by wonder. They have my mother's musical talent, my grandfather's scientific mind. They have their own talents, Zoe corrected firmly, shaped by their experiences and opportunities, not by genetics alone. Alexander sank into a chair across from her desk, suddenly looking defeated. Please, he said, his voice breaking. I've lost everything, the company, my reputation, my last chance at redemption. At least let me know my children. I initially refused to see you, Zoe replied, her tone neutral. But the children have suggested I should grant this meeting, not for your sake but for mine, for closure. Alexander looked up, confusion evident on his face. They're remarkably perceptive, Zoe continued. They believe I need this final conversation as much as you do, not for reconciliation, but for completion. For the next hour they talked, truly talked, for the first time in 12 years. Alexander finally acknowledged the full magnitude of his cruelty, the selfishness that had cost him everything meaningful. Zoe shared the reality of her struggle, the nights she'd gone hungry to feed the triplets, the discrimination she'd faced as a single mother in business. I never imagined you would achieve all this, Alexander admitted, gesturing to the office that symbolized her success. I thought that I was disposable, Zoe finished for him, that I couldn't survive in your world. I remember your exact words, Alexander. He flinched, hearing his cruel dismissal echoed back to him. I was catastrophically wrong, he said softly. and I've lost everything because of it." "Not because of one decision," Zoe corrected. "Because of who you are, someone who sees people as disposable, resources to be used rather than humans to be valued. That's why your company failed. That's why your marriages failed." "Please," Alexander said again, leaning forward, "let me know my children. Let me be part of their lives." Zoe studied him, seeing not the powerful man who had once terrified her, but someone diminished by his own choices. "That isn't my decision," she said finally. "They're almost teenagers. The choice is theirs. And if they choose not to know me, then you will have to accept that, just as I had to accept raising 3 children alone." Alexander's shoulders sagged. "What can I do to fix this?" Zoe stood, signaling the end of their meeting. "Some things can't be fixed, Alexander. They can only be accepted, but you can move forward, as I did." 2 months later, on a bright winter morning, Zoe stood with the triplets before a newly constructed building in downtown Chicago. A crowd had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony of the Johnson Foundation for Entrepreneurial Mothers, an organization funded by Zoe to provide resources, mentorship, and seed capital to single mothers with business aspirations. 10 years ago, Zoe addressed the audience, "I was a pregnant, abandoned woman with $10,000 and a broken heart. Today, I want to ensure that other women in similar situations have opportunities I didn't have. Not charity, but a chance to build their own success stories." As she cut the ribbon, flashbulbs popped and applause erupted. The triplets stood proudly beside her, their matching green-gray eyes bright with inherited intelligence but shaped by the values their mother had instilled: compassion, resilience, and integrity. Among the crowd, unnoticed by most, stood Alexander Sterling. He watched from a distance, not approaching, simply observing the family he had rejected and the extraordinary woman he had once deemed disposable. Later, as Zoe walked through the foundation's spaces, the childcare center, the business incubator offices, the training classrooms, she felt a sense of completion. The foundation's plaque caught her eye, transforming abandonment into strength, challenges into opportunities. While cutting the inaugural ribbon of the foundation that would help hundreds of abandoned women build their own empires, Zoe finally understood that the true inheritance of abandonment wasn't bitterness or revenge, but the extraordinary resilience she had discovered within herself, a legacy far more valuable than any corporate empire she or Alexander would ever possess. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.